Good evening. So I know this is the last talk of the day, so Aaron said I could do my 2-hour version, so I hope you guys are all ready. No, we'll keep this relatively short and get everyone off to dinner. So I'm here to talk about CCA, or Cordova Chrome Apps, which I've called here the other mobile Angular platform. A little bit tongue-in-cheek, as we'll learn about a little bit later. So my name is Stephen Fluin. I am head of strategy and innovation for a software company based out of Minnesota. We're an international company with about 300 people. We imagine, design, and deliver mobile and web applications. And what I transformate, I've been there about 14 years, which is a very long time in our industry, is I really try and make sure that we're figuring out what are the right approaches, what are the right technologies to be using to build fast, innovative, agile, cool new applications. So I've actually consulted with about 800 companies now at this point in terms of how to do product strategy, how to do technology strategy. That's kind of my day job, and then I'm a little bit of what I call a developer werewolf. So at night, I actually go home and code and launch and ship products. So I was actually recognized by Google as a Google Developer Expert for Chrome, which just basically means that Google has said he kind of knows what he's talking about. So I'm really going to talk about 3 things today. So I'm going to do a brief introduction to Chrome Cordova apps, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how to get started using these applications. And then lastly, I'll talk about some of the cool things that you can do from an API standpoint once you're taking advantage of these Chrome app ways of building and packaging applications. So I wanted to start off by understanding why Chrome apps. So we've got this kind of global strategy of Chrome, and you've got a lot of different ways of building Angular applications. Chrome apps are a very cool way of building an application that runs entirely client-side. Number one, you get to use HTML5, you get to use JavaScript, you get to use the latest things from Angular, and that's a very cool way of building things. As we'll continue talking about here, I'm a huge fan of the web as a platform because we've seen time and time again these kind of native device platforms are going to come up, they're going to grow, they're going to die, and the web is still probably going to be around, or at least we think it will be. We'll see what the Internet of Things does to that. Second, Chrome apps now have mobile support. So really the genesis of this talk, it's a long time coming. Back in around December to January of 2013, 2014, Google had a small team start working on a project that actually allows you to ship Chrome apps onto mobile, which is really what I'm kind of here to talk about. 3, there's some very powerful APIs that Chrome gives you out of the box. So if you're building any sort of Angular application, some things can be very painful, right? So we spent a lot of time today talking about authentication and authorization. And using, for example, one of these Chrome APIs, you can have that done for you out of the box. And then lastly, I talk a little bit about this increasingly useful store. So who here has used the Chrome Web Store ever? Wow. Okay, things have changed, and I think this timeline reflects that pretty well. So if you look back towards December 2010, when the Chrome Web Store first launched, it was really terrible, absolutely terrible. It was basically terrible, terrible web wrappers. So someone had a web page, someone else, maybe the same company, launched this app that was just a web page or a fancy bookmark, which is a little bit the state that you see in the Windows App Store today, which is a little bit embarrassing for them. But then if you flash forward now to around September 2014, there are actually a ton of real applications in there, right? So there's modern applications that run completely on the client side. They've got modern UX, they've got modern feel, they've got great database, great performance, as well as it's really a distribution platform that's kind of starting to take off in terms of being able to charge for applications as well as get this standardized distribution that makes sure that all of your users are always using the latest version of your apps. And then this store is actually getting increasingly valuable if you look just back a month where Google has kind of launched a beta of a product called Arc Welder, where now developers of native Android applications can actually use a tool to package and ship those within the Chrome Web Store. And a lot of applications now work a little bit out of the box on Windows, Mac, Linux, any device running Chrome, which is very exciting. So I'm here to talk about an extension of Chrome apps, and that's Cordova Chrome apps. They've occasionally been called Chrome Cordova apps or mobile Chrome apps. So there's a bunch of different names. There's not really much marketing going on about this cool project at Google, but I've basically been using it for about a year now, and I feel like it's one of the best ways to ship mobile applications and still be using some of the modern web toolchain, such as Angular. At the bottom of a couple of these slides, I'll have just kind of npm commands of how you can get started. The thing I want to note, though, about mobile Chrome apps or Cordova is that they're not right for everything, right? So I'm a huge fan of Angular. I'm a huge fan of the web as a platform, but it is not the same thing as native. Building a native iOS app, building a native Android app, there are still times that you should be considering it, right? So if you're using sensors extensively, if you're trying to tap into some of the newer APIs, such as Android Wear, there are things that are not yet available via any of the web frameworks that maybe make sense to build part of your application native. So really trying to understand, why are we building something using this technology set, and how well does it match to the goals of that technology set? So there's a lot of talk today about Ionic, and so even just sitting in the crowd listening, I'm like, wow, Ionic takes care of almost everything for you, right? They've got your UX as being cross-platform. They're taking care of giving you directives that are making your life easier. That's really cool. And you might be thinking, wow, maybe there's this competition between Chrome apps and Ionic apps, but that's actually not the case. When you think about building a Chrome app or a mobile Chrome app, you actually can build it using Ionic and then ship it using Chrome Cordova apps. So there's the two different npm tool chains for building and managing those applications. And to a huge amount of degree, because they use the common base around Cordova, you can actually build the same app using both of these tool sets and ship it and take advantage of both of these things. So this is an example application that I built a while ago using Angular from the ground up, and then you'll see it's actually running on Android. And so the cool thing about when you do this is this same window, whether it's responsive or not responsive, you can actually ship in the Chrome Web Store at the same time and hit both the browser demographic and the mobile demographic. And you'll also note here that because using a very similar strategy to Ionic, it has a lot of custom UX, right? So it's trying to take on its own branding look and feel, which is something that makes a mobile application feel more native and less web. So a less powerful example of this is over here on the right. So anyone that is a super Android aficionado, which there's not too many of them out there, you'll note that the corners on the text fields should be ticked up, right? That's something that's done automatically in a native Android application, but in the web, that's hard to do. But using very simple CSS, you can get it pretty close. And then looking at tool chains like Angular Material, you can actually get it much closer. And I can show anyone after if they're interested in seeing some of those things taking place. The other thing that was touched on a little bit earlier as part of the Ionic talk is this idea of the Crosswalk Project. So for those of you that don't know, Crosswalk is a project out of Intel that takes the open source build of Chromium, and ships it on mobile. And so what this does is when you're building a responsive web application or any sort of web application using Angular, one of the hardest parts is understanding, okay, what browsers are out there, what browsers are going to be used to consume my application. And thanks to the Crosswalk project that is leveraged extensively in Cordova Chrome apps, it actually ships natively with that. You don't have to worry about what sort of device your user is using, at least in the Android world. It's completely standardized. You actually ship the browser and you ship the runtime, right? So if you're looking towards Angular 2.0 or some of these other modern frameworks, if they're dependent on browser features or browser capabilities that drive performance, you're actually able to take advantage of those due to projects like this. So the second part I want to talk about is taking the Angular skill sets that I think everyone in this room already has and get them started building a Chrome app or building specifically a mobile Chrome application, because it's a little bit different. So I'm not going to get into everything. There's not time in this talk, but I've included the URL at the beginning of this presentation. I can give you guys the URL after as well. But this is the GitHub README for Cordova Chrome apps. And this is actually a fantastic set of documentation. So unlike Angular, unlike Polymer, Firebase, they don't have a huge marketing team behind this, but they actually do have very good documentation. So I want to talk about one of the heroes that happens to exist when you talk about building any sort of kind of modern web toolchain application, including Chrome Cordova apps or Chrome apps, which is the Chrome Dev Editor. So I've included a link down here at the bottom. That's the logo in the center of the Iron Man costume. What the Chrome Dev Editor is it's still in beta, but I've used it in production spaces as well as in a number of code labs for probably 6-7 months now. It is a fantastic application that runs in the browser, but as an app. So if you think about this idea, you're actually operating at a very meta level. You're using a Chrome app that ships in the Chrome Web Store to build Chrome apps, which is kind of cool, so that they're dog-fooding their own product here. And so what you're able to do is, using this dev editor, which is based off of I believe it's based off of the Atom engine that GitHub ships, you're actually able to create and run Chrome applications. And so if you hit this little play icon in the corner after creating a new project, it will actually run in the browser. And then you can actually take it one step further, and they have on their website an APK file that you can install on your Android device, and it will actually create a Wi-Fi network connection between the Android app running on your device and the Chrome dev editor. And so all you have to do is you hit play, and it ships automatically to your disconnected mobile device, which is a really cool way of iterating quickly and building these sorts of applications. So this is the UX. You're going to see this is relatively standard. They've also included a little bit of material design there. So when you start thinking about taking your standard web development skills and bringing them down into a app realm, things start to look a little bit different. I want to talk about that from a couple perspectives. The first thing that you should be aware of is all of the dependencies have to be local. So if you're used to pointing off to a content delivery network or something like that, none of that is possible. So you really do need a standard toolchain, whether it's NPM or any of those others, because you're going to be including all of those scripts locally. So over here you've got what it might look like if you're using Angular 1, Angular 2. But extending this further, there's a bad guy, right? And this bad guy that makes development of local apps harder is called the CSP, or the Content Security Policy. And so if anyone has dealt with the content security policy, it's a little bit of a pain, but what it does is it puts the browser in a much different sandbox. And what that sandbox is really designed to do is it's designed to protect the user. So if you think back to the desktop universe, where everyone was shipping applications on the desktop and it's sitting there as an exe, we had things like viruses, Trojans, et cetera, rootkits. Chrome wants to avoid all of those things out of the box, and so they've said, okay, here are limits on what you can do from an application development perspective that make your application more secure and allows us to run it with actually elevated privileges, right? So we can give your application more access to disk space, more access to network, CPU, et cetera. So the 4 tenets here, number 1, you can't actually link between pages, which if you're doing things properly in the Angular way, this isn't really a problem. Number 2, you can't load any remote resources. So this one can be a little bit tough if you're used to injecting scripts, such as Firebase, which I'll talk about in a little bit. You can't also inject images. So for example, one of the tougher challenges was in building any sort of application, maybe you want to pull in the user's profile image. And normally you're just used to setting ng source to the variable with the URL. You can't actually do that here, and you have to get around that a little bit. And then the last piece is it actually enforces the separation of all of your HTML and your JavaScript. So a lot of these things were things that you should have been doing anyway, but now they're actually enforcing them. And so on that third point about injecting images and scripts, all you really have to do is create a XML HTTP request. I'm sure there's an Angular library out there to do this. I just haven't spent much time looking. But you're just loading it via an XHR and then populating it into the DOM manually. Fortunately, when you think about the content security policy, Angular actually has already considered all of these security implications. So for example, you can't run JavaScript's eval method. And so what they've done is they've added in the base Angular 1, it's not yet there in Angular 2, is an ngcsp directive. And what that does is it actually changes the internal operation of Angular to obey the CSP. So there's a few cases, for example, where they would have used evals for performance, but instead they'll manually parse a string and then replace variables and things like that. The last piece that is a way to actually get around the CSP is that they do allow sandboxing. So within any sort of Chrome app or Chrome mobile app, you can actually use an iframe and then put that iframe in a completely different security context. This is how, for example, if you wanted to build a Firebase application today, you could still do that and then build message passing back and forth between that sandbox safe zone and the secure Chrome app. The trade-off here in order to get around all of those security protocols is that you actually give up access to all of the Chrome APIs, which is actually a pretty big deal and one of the primary reasons you'd ever want to build a mobile Chrome app. When you think about applying your Angular skills into a Chrome app, one of the first things you need to think about is views and routing. So if you've ever done any sort of native mobile development, which I think from earlier a few of you had, instead of thinking about activities, you're really just going to equate that directly into Angular views and controls. And I was recommending UI router, but as we all know now, we use component router, which should be out next week. And then some just kind of common things to think about. When you build your toolbar, if you're not using Ionic, which is a great way to take advantage of a lot of the kind of mobile standards, think about the components of your mobile app, such as the controller, and build a toolbar for that. And then it can be have its own state. You could have your breadcrumb in there and track that, so that you can handle the various events, such as the back button. The third section, the last section that I want to talk through, is really some of the Chrome APIs that make this worthwhile. And the first and probably the most interesting from my perspective is the identity API. So this is a plugin. So this is actually a Cordova plugin written by that Google team that's been working on this project for iOS and for Android that exposes to Chrome apps the ability to authenticate the user. So if you're shipping an application on the Chrome Web Store for browsers, the user actually has to make no choice to authenticate to the system. Chrome apps out of the box are authenticated if the user requires that permission and if the user is allowing that. So that means there's no user interaction to authenticate, which is actually a really powerful thing. And then when they brought that down into Android, they're actually hooking into the native Android authentication APIs. So instead of having that little web view pop up where it says, what's your username, what's your password, using the OAuth flow, they're actually using the standardized Android one where it just pops up a list of user accounts. And you click the one you want, and you hit go, which is a very powerful thing. And if you look at Ionic out of the box, you can't do that. They still need to use the OAuth flow via web, I believe. And then if you look at how that translates over to iOS, they just use the standard OAuth flow where you actually have to pop open the browser to do that authentication. So on Chrome, just to summarize, you get no input even necessary. And then on Android, you're going to get that standardized dialog. And then on iOS, you're going to get the same dialog that any of the Google applications use. The second most interesting API, that, at least personally, is the Payments API. And so what they've actually done is they've standardized across both the Chrome Web Store and Android and iOS a single payment API that allows you to do both application purchase licensing validation checks as well as kind of in-app checks. So theoretically, if you build an application that has in-app purchases, maybe you're making a game and you're selling digital goods, you can actually use the same API, just build that once, and then if you're shipping it on desktop, it's going to use the Chrome Web Store API methods. If you're shipping it on Android, it's going to use Android, iOS. And then the last one that I want to talk about is notifications. So this is a plugin, again, that they've built that exposes into your application the standardized Chrome API for notifications that then works across all of the devices. And so taking that kind of one step further, so one of the biggest problems with any sort of hybrid application is that it's inherently going to be a little bit lagging behind native platforms. And so one of the things that I've done, and is available in this GitHub repo, is I've actually extended out some of the Android Wear APIs into Cordova. So this is a fork of the Chrome Cordova apps version of the notification API that allows you to add additional pages, for example, to a notification, so that if you have a device, you're actually able to page through those notifications. There's also a lot of other cool APIs that I don't even have time to get into. So obviously alarms. So if you think about the difference between building a responsive website and building an application, some of the time you want your application to be waking up when the user is not interacting with it, right? This idea of getting access into the system or getting access into a timer. So for example, building an alarm clock. Trying to build a responsive web alarm clock is not really going to do you very much good if the user doesn't have that browser tab loaded. Whereas here, when you move it down into a Chrome app, you could do that. They also have a file system API, so you can access really, I think, as much storage as you need. Google Cloud Messaging, which is a very cool standardized framework for delivering push notifications. They have internationalization standards. You can also expose a lot of the different device capabilities. So in the same way that Cordova is doing this for mobile, they're actually doing it from a Chrome perspective so that you can do the same thing on a Chromebook that you're doing on a cell phone. Audio capture, video capture, WebSockets. There's a lot of APIs. They have a fantastic list on their website of what they're doing, and they're adding more APIs all the time. So the last piece to kind of start to close it up here is the question of Angular 2. So I talked a little bit about the content security policy. And so while you can get Angular 2 to work just fine in a sandbox, and you can actually even run Angular 2 in a standard Chrome app, unfortunately, the way that Angular 2 implements templates today is not compatible with the content security policy. So the template evaluation process, if you've included a variable in it, it actually uses JavaScript's eval method to run that, which Chrome Apps declares is unsafe, and so forbids it. So I would expect to see more, just as Angular 2 approaches feature parity with Angular 1.x. And there are some workarounds you can do, such as sandboxing, but it's not there today for production applications. So with that, I've got a lot I could probably say about Chrome Cordova Apps, but I wanted to keep it short and let you guys all get to dinner. So I will be available for questions afterwards. Thank you.